Melissa Urban, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time and you joining us. Melissa is the co-founder and CEO of Whole30. She is a New York Times bestselling author. And unfortunately, she's also a member of our concussion community.
That's right.
And that's what we're going to talk about today. So often we hear sports, military, car accident. Like those are big concussions. But like actually, they happen in everyday life too.
Yeah.
Can you tell us your story of how yours happened?
Yes. And it's funny that you bring that up because after my accident, my husband was like, you have a concussion. And I was like, that only happens to race car drivers and boxers. But it was December 2018. So it's just after Christmas. I was at a fun center with my family, extended family, nephew, kid. And we were playing laser tag. So we were in this dark arena. It's like bright lights and fog machines and the music. Yeah, to go in there now I think would be impossible. But so we're in this arena and there are these big plastic, laser tag guns. And it was the second time we had gone in. I don't actually know what happened. I was hit really hard behind my left ear. And it was either I turned and someone had a laser gun right there and they were very big and plastic, or when I came to, I was near a concrete pole. So maybe I whipped around and hit my head on the concrete pole. I'm not exactly sure what the impact was, but they describe in books often like she saw stars. And I never knew what that meant until I got hit because I saw literal stars. And I ended up on the floor. I didn't really know what happened. I stood up. I kind of shook it off. People asked if I was okay. And I went about the rest of my day. That was
as you would.
That was it. Yeah.
Like, okay. When were you like, oh, wait a second, this is maybe a little bit more and I should.
Yeah. We were down south staying with family. And for the rest of the day, I had a headache and I was irritable. But that's what happens when you're with family for 3 or 4 days in a row.
Sure.
And that's what happens when you get hit in the head. It wasn't until we came home and I was sitting at the counter on my laptop trying to answer some emails. And I said to my husband, I can't read these. It's weird. Will you look at the screen? And it was blurry. It was foggy. My eyes were jumping around. And he said, babe, I think you have a concussion. And I said, no, that's nuts. I absolutely do not. But, something weird is happening. And I kept trying to push through my normal schedule. And everything just felt terrible and wrong and off. And he kept saying, you have a concussion. You need to go get it looked at. So I went to urgent care. And they were like, yeah, you probably have a concussion. Go rest in a dark room. They don't know what to do, which is okay. But I remember for the first day or two I tried to go to I was going to the gym and really struggling in the gym. I was struggling with work. I couldn't read. I was irritable at home. I just felt wrong and I didn't know what was wrong.
And that's a really scary feeling.
Yeah, it was.
When did you first hear the term post-concussion syndrome?
Well, not until much later. Thank goodness. A physical therapist at Park City Hospital followed me on Instagram, and I had been sharing some of my symptoms. And probably a week and a half or 2 weeks after the accident, she reached out and said, I really think you should come in and get an evaluation. And happily, they were in my insurance network. So I went in for an eval, and the first thing she tested were my primitive reflexes. Oh. So if you're familiar, those are reflexes that we carry as a baby. They're survival, but as our kind of neurological skills develop, we are supposed to phase them out. And I tested positive for every single one, meaning my brain injury had sort of reverted my body back to these reflexes that don't belong in an adult human. So obviously I had a concussion. She knew that there were vision issues. There were a lot of vestibular issues because I was so dizzy and off balance. And so we addressed the vestibular issues and the primitive reflexes first. And that took a good couple months.
It takes a lot of time.
It did take a lot of time. And this was, I think, where we started to explore the idea of not all concussions get better right away. Not just sitting in a cold, dark, room with no visual stimulus is not necessarily how you treat a concussion these days. And it can take weeks, if not months. And I don't think we talked about post-concussion symptoms until I was obviously at the 2, 3, 4 month mark and still not getting much better. But that was the point where I thought, oh man, how long am I going to have to deal with this? Is this permanent? I mean, it was really scary.
Right. And can you speak to, you're going through these in some sense debilitating symptoms. These can really rock your world, but then you still have to do your life. I think people are not understanding how hard that really is.
Yes. There's so much we could talk about in terms of this being a true invisible illness, invisible condition where I looked fine. I was still showing up for work. I was still trying to go to the gym. I still had to parent. I had to exist. I had to drive. I had to do these things, but I was experiencing a lot of panic attacks. I had a lot of anxiety, which I now know was a result of my concussion symptoms. I was struggling. I felt like my personality radically changed. And that was the thing I think that scared me the most. I was irritable and short-tempered and antisocial. And now I understand it was just because any amount of stimulus, vision, auditory, cognitive was too much for me. But I had to work. I was working. It was January at this point, and that's the busiest month for my job. And I was supposed to travel and I had to cancel my trips, but I still had to write. I still had to speak. I still had to lead a team. And I kept trying to do those things around my concussion, and it only made things worse. And so I would take one step forward and what I felt like was 3 steps back.
And do you look back now and be like, how did I even do that?
Yes. I actually, in prep for this podcast, went back through sort of some of my photos and some of the things on my schedule during that time. And I was like, I don't know how I was able to show up. And my team kept saying, please take breaks, delegate as much as you can. But there's only so much that I can delegate with my job. And my husband, of course, was super stepping up at home and taking over so many things, but I can't isolate myself completely from the household and my son. So yeah, I don't know how I went through it. And I try not to dwell on the idea that if I had been able to rest more, I would have gotten better faster, because that's simply, if I could have, I would have. And I couldn't.
Right. I think about that often too.
Yeah.
Like, hey, the ideal situation is that we do almost go, this is a weird thing to say, but I didn't wish that I had a stroke, but I was almost envious of like some of those units where they can just go, all the doctors come to them, you do your therapy each day. Everyone is understanding that this is a very serious thing that happened.
Yes.
And you get to have the time off.
Yes.
And I just remember like fantasizing about like, can I just go somewhere quiet, not have to work, not have to stress about having a job, so I can have health insurance to pay for my therapies and then have friendships and, and I'm not a mother, but like, I just can't imagine all those responsibilities. So I do think, that is like the fantasy, and it's just not a reality.
I wish I could have gone dark. And I have more privilege than most in this area in that I set my own hours and I have my own company and I can take time off whenever I want to. And I only have my son every other week. So every other week I got a break from hands-on parenting. I had all of that privilege, and still it really wasn't enough to allow me to focus on my healing as much as I could. And then the fact that other people did not understand what I was feeling, what I was facing, the actual challenges I had. My husband did, because he's had concussions, but everybody in my family and other people would be like, what do you mean? Like, that was months ago. What do you mean you're not okay? What do you mean you can't read? What do you mean the light's bothering you? What do you mean you can't take your kid to the museum because there's too much stimulus? They just didn't understand. And it was really hard for me to convey the very real debilitation I was feeling.
Did you feel like through people not understanding, did you almost like push through it even more? Because you're like, I don't want to show you that I can't have the lights. So like, fine, you don't get it, then it's fine. I'll keep the lights on. Or like, what did that look like for you emotionally, to have people not even intentionally, but kind of just like talk down to your illness because they can't see it?
I think I definitely battled with that. Sometimes it was a little of me versus the concussion, like, screw you, I'm just going to do what I want to do. And then, of course, I lose every single time, but there's that rebellious nature. I think what it did for me more than anything was it made me doubt my own symptoms. I remember thinking to myself, like, people think I'm faking, and I wonder if I'm making more of it than there really is. And I wonder if I should be better than I really am. And I wonder if I'm not doing enough or pushing through hard enough. I doubted myself a lot. It's a very isolating experience. It's a very lonely experience. And it gave me so much empathy for people walking around with invisible illness. But it was hard not to see myself through other people's lens, which was, you look fine. And in these aspects of your life, you're showing up fine. And for the hour that I see you on this call, you're okay. What they didn't see were the 3 hours of tears and pain and therapy I had to do just to be there for that hour-long call. So I did a lot of therapy, a lot of like cognitive therapy around this concussion and what it meant for me as someone who identified as an active person.
Can you talk about cognitive therapy a little bit for people who haven't heard of that before? What did that look like for you?
Well, when your brain is inflamed, it's really hard to do any sort of talk therapy because your brain is the thing that hurts and it's the thing that's holding you back. But what I struggled with the most was this idea that I self-identify as someone who is active. I'm active in my exercise, I'm active in my life, I'm active in my job, and I had to be very inactive in order to do my physical therapy and in order to heal. And so I had to do a lot of work, and it was kind of piecemeal with my therapist around the fact that, you know, this identity of being active was now stripped from me. And who am I if I'm not active? And what does it mean if I'm not active? And is this perhaps staying active in a different way, right? Being active in my healing, being active in my care for myself. So that was a huge process too. It affected my life on so many different levels that it's very hard to convey to someone who hasn't gone through it.
Nearly impossible.
Yeah.
And then you start to realize how much your brain actually controls. You're like, oh no, this is literally everything.
Yeah.
So if that's hurt, it's really hard to just exist.
Yes.
In the world.
It was hard to make good decisions for myself. At times I would maybe logically know that I needed to do X, Y, Z, but my body felt okay. So I would push in the gym, or I'd push in my physical therapy exercises, or I'd try to do a hike. And sometimes it would be okay-ish. And then most of the time it would set me back quite a bit. And then I would be mad at myself, but then also, frustrated with the illness, and that would spill over into other people. I mean, it was a rough, spiral. I think, time. Yeah, for sure.
So part of the mission of this podcast, and like you just said, it's kind of impossible to get people to understand this if they haven't gone through it, but we're going to try.
Yeah.
We want to speak in really detailed language about what this feels like so people can understand. I kind of want to break down a few of those like big symptom buckets that you experienced and hear your description of like what it really felt like so people can understand.
Totally.
Like, it's not just a headache, it's not just feeling tired, and it's not just being a little nauseous. Like it's so much more than that. So A, let's help people understand, and B, let's help people who are feeling it right now like understand, hey, you're not crazy and you're not making it up. Like,
very much.
We felt it too. So maybe let's start with the vision, because like that was a big one for you.
My vision symptoms, though, it was one of the sets of symptoms we addressed much later, because there were other more foundational things. Like, we had to get my vestibular system right, the idea of just being dizzy and off balance all the time. We had to get my primitive reflexes right. But the way I describe it with vision is that my eyes weren't working well together. And I actually made a video once of trying to cross my eyes, and one of them came in, and one of them was just looking off into the distance, doing her own thing. And that's not normal. That's not supposed to happen. But I was really struggling. So focus was very hard. Words were, it's not that they were blurry. It's not like I took my glasses off and they were blurry. They just didn't make sense. I could see that there were letters, but it was very difficult to apply what those letters mean. And I write books for a living. So this was a real challenge for me. And I read books as well a lot. I'm a voracious reader. And the fact that I couldn't read books, I think, was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of, challenges for me. I could live without going to the gym. I could live with dialing down my social life, but not being able to read a book was just heartbreaking. Light stimulus, I'm still incredibly sensitive to light. So I would go into the physical therapy office for my appointment, and the fluorescent lights in the waiting room would make me cry. They also had me fill out this intake form that felt impossible to fill out. I could read the sentence. I couldn't really understand what it meant. I was struggling to find words. So the vision affects everything. It's driving and all of the stimulus that comes at you when driving. I travel a lot for work, and airports are the worst place that you could be if you have concussion symptoms. The auditory stimulus, the visual stimulus, the cognitive stimulus of like, where's my gate, and getting through TSA and all of the announcements. And it was almost impossible. You had to do it, but it was really, really hard.
And how would you describe I feel like the light sensitivity is hard for people to understand.
Yeah.
How does that feel for you when you're having a hard day and the lights are blasting?
My husband says I'm a vampire because I never turn the big lights on. The big lights are my worst enemy. My phone is always at like the lowest brightness. I'm trying to think of how to describe it to someone who doesn't experience it, but think about something that you encountered that was just immediately offensive. Maybe it was a smell. Maybe it was music that was so loud in an inappropriate time. Maybe it was someone shining a flashlight directly into your face. That's what it felt like with normal room lights. That's what it felt like with normal traffic lights or airport stimulus. It's so overwhelming and stressful for my brain. That's the best way I can describe it. Is it just this light and that light? And it just feels like stress. And so immediately my body goes into like fight or flight mode. I'm immediately on guard and struggling, and all of those energetic resources that I would normally be able to pour into like a casual conversation like this are now going into how do I mitigate the visual stress.
so challenging.
It is.
Yes. And what did you, and I know what works for some people doesn't work for everybody, but how did you kind of begin to tackle those vision symptoms?
Yeah, I did a lot of physical therapy, and like the weirdest stuff. I would joke with my PT, Lauren, I would say, I believe that there's like a group of PTs that get together and they say, what crazy exercise can we prescribe for our patients? And they'll never know that this doesn't do anything. But I would be bouncing on a trampoline, like reading letters on a board, or there would be a soccer ball that she would be throwing to me from the periphery, and I would have to call out a vegetable or a food starting with A and then B and then C and then D. It was a lot of visual challenges, but we would challenge my vision to the point where I failed or felt really stressed out, and then pull back and see if I could recover from that. And if I could, that was a good place for me to be. And if I couldn't, then we went too far and we'd have to dial it back for the next session.
That's a good lesson for people to know, that like there are things you can do though to make it better. Because I think it's like, oh, well, I went and got my eyes checked and it's 2020, so I guess there's nothing I can do for my eyes. And it's like, that's actually your brain controlling it, right?
It is.
Do you remember what it felt like when the lights weren't as offensive and we were starting to be able to read again, like what that felt like?
It was such a slow progression that I feel it wasn't just one day after PT. It was like, oh, this feels better. But what I noticed was I was able to tolerate that stimulus for longer periods of time. So I could go into the waiting room, and I didn't love the fluorescent lights, but they weren't making me cry anymore. I still use reading a book as my litmus test. If I can't read a book, that means my concussion symptoms are at a 10 and I need to dial everything back. So being able to read again was a really big deal. There were a couple physical therapy exercises like the Epley maneuvers for my vertigo where I felt immediate 50% relief, and that was fantastic. But the vast majority of my PT was slow and methodical, and things just got slowly better over time.
Can you talk about, you kind of hinted at some of the like cognitive changes that can happen.
Yeah.
Did you experience any difficulty even like word finding, speech, even conversations? I know for me, like I would have to take a nap for like 4 hours after a 30-minute, you know, at the beginning.
Yeah.
Did you have any of that, and what did that feel like?
I still do have that.
Okay,
I struggle to find my words. I'm normally pretty eloquent, I think, when I speak. I've got a lot of public speaking experience, but then we sit down in a room like this, or I get on a Zoom call after I've been recording video with bright lights like this, and I just can't find the word. And I'll sit and I'll pause and I'll just wait for it to come to me, or I'll use something that's sort of similar, and my team knows. But that, I think, is one of the biggest struggles for me. That feels really scary for me, not to find the word, and then to think, you know, immediately my brain goes into, what if this is permanent, and what if it just keeps getting worse? And that's where the anxiety kicks in. I had a lot of anxiety with my concussion, and I'm not normally an anxious person. When my husband knows my concussion symptoms are bad, because I will ask him the same question like 7 times. Do you have directions to where we're going? Are we going to take the highway? Okay, the highway's coming up here. Our reservation is at this time. Like, I'm repeating the same things over and over, looking for reassurance, and that's typically not how I behave. And that's where he's like, babe, that's concussion. He can sometimes spot it before I do. So the anxiety, the losing words, the personality changes of just feeling anxious and feeling irritable as a result was all pretty new.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say about the personality changes and kind of the identity shift and that whole kind of complication when you're saying, like, I'm a very seasoned public speaker, like that I can always find before that, and then having to have that struggle where it's almost like, did my IQ change? Did I, you know, like you just are, can you describe some of that journey that you had to go on of not feeling like yourself, and okay, but where do I go next?
Yeah. For a while, at work especially, because I'm on video a lot for work. I'm doing a lot of content. For a while, I tried to sort of hide it or cover it up. So it would take me 27 takes to do a 30-second reel when normally I could rattle it off. And I remember being at an event that I'd gone to every single year. I had to take a year off or 2 years off, and having to do content for Applegate. We were doing content for this partner of ours, and I couldn't get it down. It was probably a 5 or 6 second spiel, and I couldn't do it. And I ended up sharing the outtakes, the bad takes. And I was like, this is what my concussion symptoms look like. And I felt a huge sense of relief after doing that, because I thought, I don't have to pretend anymore. And I started sharing more and more publicly some of the ways that it was affecting me. And I don't know that it helped other people understand as much as it helped me feel as though I didn't have to try to hide or cover it up or present in any way other than I actually was showing up. So that was very helpful for me.
That's amazing. And it's like crazy that there happens to be this like shame. It's like we didn't ask for the injury. If someone breaks their leg, they're not like, I'm so nervous to tell you that I have a broken leg.
Right.
It's just another element of that invisible injury that makes me like angry to hear you say that I'm like, oh, I wish that she didn't have to feel that way.
Yeah. It gave me so much empathy for people who are going through this invisible illness, because again, to everyone else, you look fine, you're performing fine in some areas. It's been so long. Why aren't you over this yet? Most people are over it by now. Is it really as bad as you are saying that it is? And then sometimes it was like, well, why are you continuing to travel if you know it makes things worse? And so then there's that, balance of, am I trying to do too much? Should I be resting more? But if I'm resting, who's taking the kid to all of his practices? And it's hard to hear outside opinions. And there were a lot of times I had to show up on social media and say, I am not requesting feedback. I will not hear feedback, because people inevitably want to share something with you. They want to tell you about something that they heard or something that they did. And sometimes I'm open to that, but sometimes it just feels like an assault all over again. I'm already struggling with this. I'm already doubting myself. I'm already questioning whether I'm doing the right thing. To hear that from somebody else, there are moments where I was like, I can't take that on too. I really can't.
I can't imagine. Going back to what you said in the beginning about being active and like that being such a core tenet of who you are.
Yeah.
And I know we hear this from a lot of athletes, obviously, and like this injury kind of destabilizing that. How did you cope with that? How did you find movement again? What about exercise was so challenging with the concussion?
Yeah.
Because people would say, well, you're not playing football. Like, why can't you go on a run?
Yeah. Oh, man. I've been using exercise for my physical health and my mental health for 20-something years. And not being able to get out and do the things that make me feel good, whether that's a run or a hike or a hot yoga session or just a hard workout, was very, very hard. I didn't realize that I had attached my identity to being active until that was taken away. So obviously that's a challenge in and of itself, but I missed the physical outlet of it, certainly. I missed, I think, the routine of it. I'm a very routine-driven person, and my morning routine is very scheduled, and so I had to find some other way of maintaining movement in the morning, whether that was PT exercises or a gentle walk or some light stretching or whatever I could do. Once we figured out that I had a form of nervous system dysautonomia, a POTS-like condition as well, which took a couple years to figure out, then a lot of what was happening to me from a physical sense made so much more sense. It was like, oh, this is why every time I go for an easy hike now I'm bonking, and this is why I can't run, and this is why I can't sit in hot tubs or do a hot yoga class. Or there were a lot of things that diagnosis helped solidify for me. And then it gave me a whole new avenue of physical therapy to explore. But it was so hard. I said to my husband, I feel like I am sick and I need to heal from this illness, but all of the things I would normally do that make me feel good, I can't do.
Yes.
I can't exercise. I can't hang out with friends. I can't read. It was a struggle to sit down and watch a movie. Like, all of the things that make me feel better are no longer available to me. So what am I supposed to do? It was really frustrating.
I'm so glad you just said that, because that is just such, oh my gosh. And what did you do? You just...
I pitched a lot of tantrums, I'll tell you that. Not that did any good.
Day, really.
Yeah. I decided that I would make my job healing and that I would be active in my own recovery. And very often that meant telling myself to slow my roll or telling myself that's not healthy for you right now. It meant really focusing in on my physical therapy exercises and really listening to everything they wanted me to do and not to do. That was that was an active pursuit. It was very much a mental reframe that I had to do. And then with time, as things got better and I was able to reclaim going for a walk or able to reclaim reading a book, my sense of gratitude and awe for that simple function, you can't appreciate what you have until you lose it, I think, truly. So that was something, it was like every discovery of something that I could do again, even if it was small, was such a delight and such a triumph that I really tried to hold on to that sense of gratitude. That helped a lot.
I think that's so wise, and that's something that can really get you through.
Yeah.
Back to the dysautonomia and POTS-like symptoms. Can you that might be a new phrase for a lot of
Yeah.
people, but it is quite common after concussion. Can you explain what that looked like for you?
So we went through the primitive reflexes, vestibular work, vision work. And then my physical therapist sent me out into the world and was like, keep doing this stuff, but you're really doing better. And I still had this collection of symptoms that I felt were unrelated and weird. And I just never brought them up to my physical therapy team. I couldn't go in hot tubs. Anytime I would sit in a hot tub, it would trigger my concussion symptoms. I'm like, that's weird, but I don't really love hot tubs, so NBD, I'll just avoid it. I went for a hike. Granted, it was a very hard hike, and I wore compression socks, which I normally wore, very light compression. I bonked on this hike so hard. My legs felt like lead. I felt like I had no energy. I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it back. And I thought, that's really weird. I had fueled properly. I felt like I was in a good place. So I had all of these symptoms, and I was talking about it on a podcast that I was doing about my concussion. And my physical therapist heard, and she was like, get in here right now. So I went back in, and she put me on the Buffalo treadmill test, which is a test where you're walking at a consistent pace, and they continue to increase the speed and increase the elevation. And what you're looking for is your autonomic nervous system, the nervous system that controls your blood pressure and your heart rate, the things that are typically like behind the scenes. When you have dysautonomia, those things kind of go haywire when exposed to different stressors. For me, we determined that heat, altitude, and physical exertion were triggers. So I got on this treadmill test, and I didn't even make it halfway through before my heart rate, which typically you would see kind of incline as it gets harder, plummeted. And she was like, get off, we're done. I know exactly what's going on with you. Wow. So that was a diagnosis that I hadn't heard before, I wasn't familiar with, but made a lot of sense to me. She said to me, your body is no longer regulating your blood pressure effectively. So when you're on a hike in compression socks, which affects your circulation, your body's not handling that well. When you are exerting yourself with exercise, at a point your body there's too much stress, and your heart rate goes haywire, your blood pressure goes haywire. And I had experienced that and just didn't know how to name it, or didn't even know that those things were related.
Right. Was that validating in a way?
It was validating, but it was also discouraging because I was like, okay, there's this like other thing I have to do. But for me, my path to healing was just to continue to increase my tolerance to exercise, heat, and altitude. So it was like at first I could only walk, and I had to keep my heart rate below 110. I mean, I can, there's barely a walk that you can do to keep your heart rate there, but I had to do that until I felt comfortable there and didn't notice any heart rate jumps. And then it was like you could increase your heart rate to 120, and then you could try going for a walk, but at a little bit of a higher elevation. And it took all summer. It took months of this, but slowly I was able to build my tolerance up to be able to tolerate more heat, more physical exertion, and more altitude. So it was discouraging, but also I was like, this could be the final piece that I've been missing.
Right. And have you seen progress?
Yes, huge progress. Yeah. I would say at this point, my concussion symptoms are like 90% controllable. I still have heat issues. I still cannot handle heat. So I'm trying to increase my heat tolerance by exercising in the heat or I can sit in a hot tub, but not for very long. So can I sit in a hot tub for a little bit longer? I can't do any hot yoga classes whatsoever, which really sucks. I miss those. Travel is still hard, but I'm able to like hike and go for trail runs with no issues. The only thing I notice is if I'm doing a lot of long hikes right in a row at higher altitude, anything like above 10,000 feet, by the second or third day, I'm like, okay, I need a day off. But the amplitude has decreased, and I'm recovering faster, which I think is really promising.
That's really encouraging.
Yeah, it is.
That's incredible to hear.
Yeah.
And have you found, when you say they're 90% manager, like you really have to be so in tune with your body and your brain almost to kind of like mitigate some of those triggers? Is that your experience, or are you just kind of like, I can move in the world however I want, I'm just gonna?
No, I mean, I do try to mitigate triggers as much as I can. As an example, I go to this event every March. It's a big food event in LA. There's tens of thousands of people. It is loud. It is bright. I am talking to a bazillion people. I know that if I want to spend 6 hours at that event, I have to go back to my hotel room all by myself and talk to 0 persons until the next day. And so I try to kind of build recovery activities in around these things that I know that I have to do.
I'm curious what you would say. I think people get really stuck on the like, I want to get back to my old self. I'm chasing that old self. And hearing you say like, okay, I know I can exist in this, but I have to do this break, like what would you say to someone that is like, I just want to be back to normal. I just want to be back to normal. I need to get back to how I used to be before the concussion.
I had to accept that my normal was going to be different. My normal has been different. And every stage in my healing process, it looked different. For a very long time, normal was not going to the gym and not running and not hiking. It was going for a lot of walks and doing a lot of yoga and mobility. So that was, I think, the first thing, is kind of accepting that might shift. Even today, I haven't gone to a concert. I can't imagine going to a concert and how much that would just trip my symptoms. So there are things that I used to enjoy that I'm like, those are no longer available to you. And I just had to learn to accept that. And it is what it is. And maybe someday, I'm not going to write it off entirely. But for now, if I want to be able to live most of my life the way I want to and exist and show up the ways that I want to, there are a couple things that are just off the table for me. And that's okay. It was not always easy to accept that. But people around me have also learned to accept that. My team, when we do these big offsite meetings, they know that there's a chance that I won't be able to join them for dinner because I've been on presenting and talking in this loud group for 8 hours. So they know that I might not be able to go. My husband understands the environments in which I still struggle, but your life might look different going forward, and that's hard to accept. And also, the faster I learned to accept it, or the more I embraced it, the better I did, honestly.
I think that's great advice for the mental health too.
Yeah.
This just can be really discouraging if you are just like, and now it's to the point, I don't know if you can relate to this, but for me, having it be 8 years almost, like I don't even remember what that really felt like, Yeah. I don't know what the normal is anymore. This is the new normal.
It is.
Like, I'm just going to be so grateful for that.
Yeah.
And you can still track like, 3 years ago, this interview would have been a nightmare
Yes.
for both of us.
Yeah.
Probably. I would have been so nauseous and like, these lights are insane.
I know.
And so it's like, that's progress that
it
you
is.
can hold on to and be grateful for. We haven't really talked about the social aspect of it. I mean, kind of hinted at it, but I think that the isolation and the loneliness, can you speak to that a little bit to really explain to people how truly challenging that can be? And also if they are in that space, it is lonely, but also we understand. Yeah,
especially in the beginning, it was very hard to explain to, for example, family. My parents would come stay with me, and after dinner, it would be like, I'm in my room. That's it. I can't, but if I've spent all day with you, I'm not able to socialize after dinner. We can't go out. Can't play a game. And they didn't necessarily understood it, but they accepted and encouraged it if that was what I needed to feel better. It was definitely harder for some of my friend group because I didn't necessarily want to go into all the details of if I do this with you, this is how I'm going to feel for the next 6 days. But I did bow out of a lot of stuff. And I think it definitely hurt some of my friendships, but at the same time, I was like, I can't, I can't show up for you and then not be able to show up for myself or my family. The pandemic also happened in the middle of this, right? So my accident was in late December 2018, and then the pandemic hit, and we were all inside for a while. And honestly, that was probably the best thing to happen to my healing. Because I didn't have the social limitations and I didn't have all of the kind of connections. But I have definitely I'm an introvert anyway, but this experience has made me far more introverted. I need way more alone time than I did before the concussion from a physical and mental perspective. And I'm pretty aggressive about protecting that.
Good for
whatever
you.
that looks like. It's hard. I definitely think some social things are just, people kind of stopped inviting me to things, which I understand because I kept saying no. No, I can't go to hot yoga with you. No, I can't go to this show. I can't go to this big event. And that part kind of sucks. But I also just have to remember they don't have to understand it. I just have to honor what I know my body is and is not capable of right now.
Right. And you just spoke to, I think, the in the earlier part of that answer, the non-linear part of it of maybe you would look better for a day and then things then go downhill, and how challenging that can be and hard socially too. Maybe I could come to this one party, but then for the next 3 weeks I can't come to a different thing. Can you speak to that for someone who might be experiencing that and feeling, oh my gosh, I had the best day ever yesterday. Now why do I feel so awful? And I just I'm having such a hard time coping with this back and forth.
I think about recovery from concussion symptoms just like I do any exercise activity. If you push yourself really hard one day, there's a very good chance that you're going to have to take it easier the next day. And so in the beginning, there was a lot of rebellion. There was a lot of, I'm going to test this. I don't think this is going to work, but I'm going to test it because I want to do it. Or I want to join my friends for this thing, so I'm going to do it. Screw it. And I would pay for it dearly and realize that that wasn't necessarily serving me. But I just think about activities like this now from a much broader perspective. If I want to do this thing, if I'm going to on this trip in March and I know I'm going to be at this event for 2 days in a row, what do I have to do leading up to it? I have to have a lot of quiet time. I have to get great sleep because lack of sleep is one thing that will make my concussion symptoms so much worse so fast. I've got to load myself up with really good food that makes me feel good. I don't want to introduce any other stressors into my body. I'm going to lay low for a couple days. And then I go to this event and then I know on the back end I have to do the same thing. I'm not going to be able to come home and go for a long run or a long hike. It's going to be easy walks. It's going to be lots of sleep. It's going to be more quiet time at home. And so if I can plan for that, then I'm able to mitigate the worst of the effects and recover quicker. But there's a lot more thought that has to go into it. It's not just like a friend calls and says, do you want to go to this concert tonight? It's like, yeah, sure, let's go. That does not exist for me anymore.
Right. And I just hearing you talk is showing just the profound impact that this injury has. Like, I'm so grateful to hear you're like 90% there. You're like, I am feeling good. I can do my life. But that doesn't mean you just do your life.
No.
Like, there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is speaking to like, wow.
Yeah.
This is not just a concussion.
It's not. And I hear people with other illnesses talk about this, spoon theory. How many spoons do I have today? And I hear them talk about the fact that something that other people, it's just so simple for them, requires so much more planning and preparation and consideration on both ends of the event. And sometimes I try to mitigate by saying, yes, I can come, but I can only come for the first hour. And I know it's going to be quieter during that time and it won't be as busy. And so I come and I show up and I get that social interaction and then I leave. Other times it's like, I can't do yoga with you at night because it's 90 degrees outside and that's too hot for me, but I'll meet you in the morning. So I'm learning ways to, I think, mitigate some of the symptoms, but still have those interactions in ways that I can. And then for the things that I just can't make work or I'm not willing to make work because of what it's going to look like in the after effects, I just have to say no.
Yeah. And just be comfortable in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about motherhood? With this, I just want to touch on that briefly. We actually have a support group that's concussions for, or it's not called Concussions for Mom. I don't know. I'm blanking on what it's called, but it's moms who have had concussions and are like grappling with like, okay, you can't just turn off being a mom. And how do you have all of these symptoms and continue that and what that looks like? And if you have any comment on kind of that journey for you and any advice you would give for those other moms who are finding themselves in that group, just like, I don't know how to do this.
It's so hard. My son was 6 when I got my concussion. He's 12 now. So it's been about 6 years. And luckily, I have a partner who's like always been 50-50 in terms of division of household labor and childcare. But it was hard, especially in the beginning. There were a lot of things I couldn't take him to. I can't take you to the museum. I can't take you to play laser tag again. I can't take you to the arcade. I remember trying to take him to a local museum and ending up having to go sit in the car in the dark, and I cried. I just cried for the entire time because my husband was in there with him and I could not be in that space. And so explaining to him at that age, I hit my head and it makes me sick, and there are some things that are just really, really hard for me. That was just sort of how I explained it. Yeah. But there were a lot of days where I gave all of my energy to him. And I had nothing left for work. I had nothing left for me. I didn't have anything left, but that sometimes is what motherhood requires. He was there. He had things to do. It was school. It was homework. It was whatever. And it was like, okay, I'm going to give my spoons to you. And then other things just had to take more of a back seat. And I really feel like my husband got the short end of the stick a lot. And I'm so grateful that he was so understanding. But that was the one thing where it was like that had to go on a back burner. And I think, honestly, I put my own healing on the back burner at times because you've got to show up.
Yeah. You can't stop.
Like
we mentioned. What would you say, obviously the theme of this podcast being invisible impact, we've talked about it in different ways, but what would you kind of narrow down as the most challenging part of living with an invisible injury?
I think it was trusting myself to know my own body, my own symptoms, and what I was experiencing. That part took a very long time, in part because I had no experience with concussion before I sustained one. So I had all these preconceived notions about what it was and what it wasn't, and the experience was so radically different than what I had imagined, in part because there hasn't been historically a lot of literature around long-term concussion symptoms, and not specifically with women or everyday events, as you mentioned. We talk about it with football, maybe with boxing, with race car driving. So that's why I think podcasts like this are so important, in part because other people didn't understand it, and their reflections on my behavior or the way I was showing up, it was hard not to absorb those. But I think that was the hardest part, was knowing that on the outside I looked fine, but on the inside, trusting that the symptoms I was experiencing were in fact so bad that yes, I had to say no to this thing, or yes, I had to stay home, or yes, I had to go to bed early, or yes, I had to go to my room when everyone else was out in the living room having a good time. It was just trusting myself to make those judgments for myself. That took a really long time, and I railed against it for a while. I doubted myself for a very long time. I remember having just months where I thought to myself, am I faking? Am I faking? Am I just clinging to this because it's hard to return to the real world, or it's nice to take a break from some of my responsibilities at work? I wasn't, but it's hard not to go there with myself. It's hard not to ask myself, are you making more of this than there needs to be, right? And then that would spawn me taking on more activity. It was like, maybe I am, and I'm going to do these things. Exactly. And then, kind of falling even further back into my symptoms. So I think that was the hardest part, is just learning to trust and the signals my body was sending me, and feeling confident enough to act on those in my own best interest.
Yeah, I think that's so important for people listening to hear that too. Like, you can get there, and that is going to help you feel better.
Yeah.
But my heart also is like aching for you in the room by yourself while everybody's out there having the party, because I've been there, and it's just
it sucks.
Horrible.
I have talked about my concussion a lot, and a lot of people have reached out to me when they've had concussions, just to say, thank you so much for talking about it, because I feel less alone. And so connecting with other people who've gone through the same thing has also been hugely helpful for me. It helps me realize I'm not the only one. I'm not alone. You're not faking it. Like, these things are very real. Sharing strategies for things that work and maybe things that didn't, and where you are in your journey, hearing from people who say, oh yeah, I was going through that, and now I feel as though I'm at that 90% mark myself. That was very important, because it is a very isolating, I think, thing to happen.
Yeah, it's so important to hear somebody else say, like, no, you actually can get better.
Yes.
And to that, I think people watching this, and I remember I used to kind of listen to some things, and people would be like, yeah, and I'm better. I'd be like, no, but how? Like, exactly what did you do? Because I want to do it too. And obviously I won't have you do that, because every single brain is different, and people are going to respond to different things. But can you think of any of the, like, modifications in your day-to-day life that aren't like this medication or this exact thing that did actually make a difference? Yeah.
I mean, obviously going to see a physical therapist with experience in TBI, that is the thing I tell people right off the bat, is not every PT is going to understand this condition. And so finding someone who specializes in this, whether it's a PT, an OT, a neurologist, is super important. That way you can get put on a very specific kind of trajectory for healing, because there are several different types of concussions. I accidentally discovered along the way that cold exposure was excellent for my concussion.
Wow.
Though heat exposure is still a trigger, cold showers and cold plunges were hugely helpful for my symptoms immediately. Wow. And that's not going to work for everyone who has POTS. For some people, cold will be a trigger, but I started taking cold showers in 2020 after reading a book, and I was like, I've been kind of playing around with it. And after my very first one, I feel like it helped my mood. It definitely helped my energy. And over time, it certainly helped my anxiety and concussion symptoms. So that was something I stumbled into, where I was like, cool, that has been really, really helpful for me. I went to get an Erlin screening. So an Erlin screening is, you work with a specialist. They're all across the country. But what they do is essentially figure out if there's a translucent colored paper that you put over your reading materials that makes the words come into focus better. I have no idea how it works. It seems like voodoo or magic to me, but we did determine that there was a shade of violet that if I put over my reading material, it helped those letters come better into focus, and it relaxed my eyes and the stress on my eyes. And I was like, that's cool. So if I wanted to read and was struggling, I would just take that little translucent paper and put that over. That was a pretty accessible and easy, I think, addition to my physical therapy that was helpful. But I think sometimes it's just listening to other people's experiences and just trying stuff. And maybe it's going to work and maybe it isn't. But I did a lot of that, and some of it helped and some of it didn't. But the things that helped so much that I was like, okay, I'm going to stick with this.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad that you found those, and I'm hopeful that people can keep trying and not be discouraged when one thing doesn't work.
Yes.
I know how hard that can be. And it's hard to see progress too. And some of the therapies like you talked about, like it can be months and months, and you're like, oh, is this even doing anything? I don't want to do my exercises at home. I don't want to do this anymore. But like it actually can really make a difference for some people. What is your message of hope? Obviously your story in general is going to be very hopeful to some people. She did get better. She is able to do all that, your life is very inspirational that you're able to do what you do. What would be your message of hope to someone, who might be, we talk about those first few weeks, but I'm wondering, what would you say to someone who's on year 2, year 3?
I think a really important thing is not to compare your experience with anyone else's with a concussion. It was easy for me to look at people and they were like, oh yeah, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, I felt better. And it was like, what am I doing wrong? So I think not comparing your journey to anyone else's is very important, because everyone's symptoms are different, and the way you respond and your life and the kind of obligations that you have are all going to be very different. I think releasing expectations around what getting better looks like is also really important. And I don't say that lightly, because I know it's not easy. But if you are thinking about, well, I should be to this point, or I should be able to do this again, perhaps releasing those expectations and just accepting where you are and looking for those small things that maybe are getting better or are at least changing, I found really helpful. It was hard not to want to take a super long view and say, it's been 6 months. Why can't I do my favorite hike yet? But I was able to get up onto a foothill trail and go for a walk, and I couldn't do that a couple months ago. So we're heading in the right direction. Even if progress is slow, even if it's not where you want to be, the more I just accepted what was and tried really hard to find the gratitude in that. I know it sounds so cheesy, and it's, not always easy to achieve. And I think that you can be grateful and also think things suck in the same breath. And I think you should allow space for both. But the more I was able to look at where I was and just say, these are the good things about where I am right now in my healing journey, the easier it felt from a mental health perspective.
Amazing perspective. I wish I could have heard that exact message several years ago.
I wish I could have told myself 6 years ago, but I don't think I would have listened.
Right. Sure, right. Thank you so much for your time, Melissa. It's amazing to have you on, hear your perspectives, and thank you for everything you've done throughout the last 6 years for the community, sharing your story, giving people that outlet to reach out to you and to feel so much less alone, because they know someone else has been through it. And
I really
it
hope
means
that
so
helps.
much.
Yeah, I really do. Thank you.
Thank you.